Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Berlin. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to thank all of you for joining this session today. I'd like to thank the Coalition for Green Capital for co-sponsoring this event with the Atlantic Council. This event is titled Solution Summit, Creating an Equitable Workforce for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is a critical topic because the transition to a clean energy economy is likely to be the principal driver of economic growth in the United States and around the world for the next several decades. Trillions of dollars a year are likely to be spent on it, and the spending is going to create tens of millions of jobs. This job creation raises a whole series of issues. First, do we have the workforce to do these jobs? If not, how do we train that workforce? How do we bring it about? Will the job creation be equitable? Will there be a diverse workforce built? Will there be jobs in disadvantaged communities? What will the wage structure be like under this transition? Will labor unions play a critical role in that? How do we train the national institutions, the green banks, and the other institutions that are going to implement the greenhouse gas accelerator provision in the Inflation Reduction Act? How do we train them in the labor issues, and how do they implement those issues, which require development of workforce plans and other things? And how do they work with the 1,000 or more institutions that are likely to receive funding from these institutions? How do they work with them on labor issues? These are the kind of issues we're going to discuss today. And we're very fortunate to have as our keynote speaker, Senator Ed Markey. Everyone knows Senator Markey. I don't have to give him a long introduction, but I do want to say, working with Senator Markey on green bank issues many, many years ago. He was a champion of a green bank and still is. He was a champion and is a champion of the Green New Deal. He's been a champion of countless green issues and environmental issues and climate issues over the years. He's been a strong supporter of consumers and working Americans. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Senator Markey to give the keynote address to start this conference. Thank you, Senator Markey.
Well, thank you, Ken. Thanks for all of your great work on this issue. Thanks to the Atlantic Council for putting on this important event, because this is a absolutely critical issue. How do we ensure that this new workforce is equitable as this greenhouse gas reduction fund, the climate bank, the green bank, whatever you want to call it, starts to unleash this incredible investment in our country in the green energy sector. And as one of the lead authors of this statute underpinning the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I'm excited about the Environmental Protection Agency's progress in making this vision for investment in climate finance for disadvantaged communities a reality, because we all know that a vision without funding is an hallucination, and that's why we built in $20 billion for broad-scale climate finance efforts, at least 40% of which must go to disadvantaged communities. And in addition to that, a $7 billion Solar for All campaign that also is going to be unleashed. And right now, our nation is on the brink of a once-in-a-generation transition. We're at the dawn of a new industrial revolution, a clean energy future that's going to tackle climate change at the scale that the crisis absolutely demands. And to meet this challenge, we're going to need to transform every aspect of our society and our economy. But unlike the original Industrial Revolution, which perpetuated economic inequality and racial injustice, this clean energy transition will have the principles of the Green New Deal at its core: justice, good paying jobs, and emissions reduction, all happening simultaneously. And thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, we're poised for a technological, economic, and climate justice revolution like this country has never seen before. And as the lead author with Senator Van Hollen of the Senate's National Climate Bank Act, I worked with advocates and experts for years to plant the seeds for greenhouse gas reduction funds, historic climate finance funding in the IRA. And Ken, you clearly were one of the people who had a vision for this. And I'm proud to see this investment blossom now as the EPA begins to realize our vision of creating a new long-lasting program that will transform our climate economics, cut emissions, protect public health, and create opportunity in disadvantaged and under-resourced communities. And that's going to require effective and intentional implementation, so the communities won't be left out of this monumental success. In my book, that would just be a monumental failure. But if it is implemented properly, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has the potential to unleash tens of billions and ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars in much needed private investments. And this program will leverage the power, the expertise, the longstanding relationships of public, semi-public, and nonprofit community leaders in order to engage in a joint national fight against the climate crisis. And to strategically distribute this $27 billion in grant funding, the EPA has said it intends to hold 3 complementary competitions. The $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund competition, which is going to fund 2 to 3 national nonprofits. And these national entities will deliver financing for clean technology projects to communities, businesses, community leaders, and more. The $6 billion Clean Communities Investment Accelerator competition, which is going to provide 2 to 7 awards to nonprofits that can rapidly build the clean financing capacity of specific networks of community lenders, and the $7 billion Solar for All competition, which will provide up to 60 grants to states, tribal governments, municipalities, and nonprofits to bring low-income and disadvantaged communities access to residential and community solar investment. So when crafting the statute behind the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we envision the world that it could create: efficient, electrified, affordable housing, community solar, and battery storage to power our communities through crises, charging stations to electrify our transportation and support clean transit, and so much more. But these competitions can't just be focused on decarbonization. They also have to adhere to the other 2 pillars of the Green New Deal: good paying jobs and climate justice. So in fighting to protect our future from climate change, we have to work to address the consequence of environmental, economic, and racial injustice in the present. And the EPA has been very clear. Justice 40 has to be in every competition, bringing dollars to communities that have been locked out of funding for a clean economy. We have to ensure funding and partnerships reach the communities that are first in line for climate destruction and who have been last in line for federal resources for far too long. And the applicants must also create high quality jobs that lift up workers and families while strengthening American businesses. The applicants have to ensure that there are high quality jobs as part of their application, so that the workers in these communities are going to get the jobs that will in fact be helping their own communities, from solar installers to contractors working on affordable, energy efficient multifamily homes. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund will create all kinds of clean energy jobs, and these should be good jobs. Relevant Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund projects have to be compliant with the prevailing wage provisions in the Clean Air Act. Prevailing wage must be paid, and applicants can and should be thinking ahead about how they can partner with unions, engage in job training, and protect these labor agreements that should in fact be negotiated so that it's very clear that there needs to be an expansion of employment opportunities for underrepresented communities. All of that has to be part of this discussion. And to successfully develop and grow this new workforce, it is critical that workers receive the training, the support, and fair wages they need to successfully build our clean energy future. We have to make sure that our climate investments are implemented with equity and transparency, bringing opportunity for everyone instead of sacrifice just for some. And so the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is an historic transformative investment in clean energy and environmental justice. We have to protect it from attacks. We can see it's happening already with Speaker McCarthy targeting the bank for elimination. We know it's going to come. We know at the same time that as we implement it, we have to get it right so that it's not subject to attack from the oil, the gas, the coal industry supported organizations that will be attacking. So my office welcomes insights and feedback from any participants today on the EPA's guidance, including on creating an equitable workforce as we continue to engage with the administration on this critical program. I had many talks with Marty Walsh, who was the Secretary of Labor, before he just left to run the National Hockey League Players Association. And he was absolutely committed to ensuring that the Department of Labor would be ready to help to assist in ensuring that this program was implemented correctly. So we're at the dawn of a new era, but for Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities especially, there is a real opportunity here to see enormous job training, apprentice programs, and ultimately people not just getting a job, but getting a career in a clean energy field. And that's one of the most exciting parts about this entire program. So thank you again to the Atlanta Council for inviting me to speak with you this morning. And I look forward to hearing more from today's panelists about how businesses and organizations can build an inclusive workforce that will chart a path for a healthier future for everyone. Thank you, Ken, so much for inviting me.
Great. Thank you, Senator Markey, for your leadership and for this very, very clear introduction, helpful introduction to the act and to its vision and to what it's trying to accomplish. Our first panel today is on recruiting, training, and sustaining the workforce. It's going to be moderated by Libby DeLucia Harding. She is the founder and principal in Empowering Work Advisors. I will let Libby tell you a little bit more about herself and about the other panelists. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm Libby DeLucia Harding, founder of Empowering Work Advisors, which is my consulting practice focused on clean energy and workforce development specifically. I've been working with Block Power on an innovative HVAC training program, as well as some offshore wind efforts and a large philanthropic fund funding clean energy workforce development. So let me start by introducing our panelists. Our goal today, again, is to discuss how the GGRF can best support the clean energy workforce transition. And we want to create conversation and buy-in from key stakeholders from the beginning of this process. So we have a great panel, including representatives from impact investing, labor unions, Black-owned businesses, and a discussion of the pathway for students to get into clean energy trades. So I'll start by introducing Michael Grossman. He is the managing director of impact investing at Social Finance, which manages a range of workforce development finance vehicles. John Doherty is from the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, who is the senior advisor to the general president with a focus on climate infrastructure and workforce development. Michael Dorsey is a recognized expert in global energy, finance, and sustainability who currently serves as the Director and Chair of the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solutions Service at Arizona State University, and as a board member of Black Owners of Solar Services. David Owen is a staff writer for The New Yorker who recently wrote an article called The Great Electrician Shortage, which explored the skilled labor gap in vocational training in high schools and adult programs. So with that, let's start with our first question, and I want to keep this high level to get insights from each of these panelists. What do you see as the key opportunities and challenges in developing the workforce for the clean energy transition? And I'll start with John Doherty.
Thanks, Libby. I mean, this is historic, monumental. I think everybody is getting their heads around, all of the different funding opportunities that are coming down, what this is going to catalyze in terms of jobs and what we can do. I think in terms of unions, it's what we've always done is supply a workforce, train a workforce, and protect the workforce. So for us, looking at this huge opportunity to get out into all communities, to pull people in, to be a solution to labor shortages through the green economy, I think is, something that we've been hungry for a long time, being that, labor unions over time have not, had the market share out there in the construction workforce that they've enjoyed in decades past. So right now is, an opportunity for a lot of stakeholders that exist in all these communities to come together and really learn what a workforce development system should look like and incorporate all of the outreach that goes into vocational training to all of our K-12 school systems, to all of our communities, and start to think about what that looks like to supply a labor force to an emerging economy that's coming out that, like the senator said, is going to last a couple of decades.
Thanks, John. Michael Dorsey, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. So in my hat as Secretary of Black Owners of Solar Services, we began this journey long before the passage of the IRA. In conversations, not just with the heads of that unit, in the greenhouse gas reduction effort that's now stood up and sitting in EPA, but really we began this conversation almost a year ago now with folks in other agencies, specifically in the Department of Energy, so much so that in the Q1 of this year, we signed off on a cooperative agreement with the Department of Energy to launch what's called the Equitable Clean Energy Advancement Initiative, and where we at ASU have been working in support of folks at Black Owners of Solar Services, really preparing for this transition. This is a process that's, I think, where the greenhouse gas reduction effort in the Environmental Protection Agency is one of the many trees that are going to really advance the clean energy process in this country. When they signed, since the signage and passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, we've seen an explosion in the number of jobs in the sector, almost 100,000 in the past quarter alone. We've seen an explosion in the growth of clean energy projects, north of 100 in just Q1 of this year. And really, the process is well underway. We've been trying to place and facilitate access to this process with our member companies and Black Owners of Solar Services. We're going to continue to do that, certainly across this year and into the next really decade plus going. It's certainly not without its challenges. The remarks, of Senator Markey are absolutely key. We are at a sort of, I think, not just a historic crossroads, but really we are where we should have been perhaps a decade ago in making sure that the clean energy revolution, the revolution that's going to reset this economy and really the planet's economy, is going to include all hands on deck, is going to include the most diverse businesses. It's going to include certainly upsides for diverse communities that have long been the recipients and on the downside of energy injustice, a problem that we still face, certainly in this country, affecting those on the margins that are the poorest of the poor, those in tribal communities and so forth. So there are challenges, but there are huge opportunities that really started even before the passage of RA, started before the creation of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Initiative, and ones that we've got to be involved in and really spell out the access to for businesses, for communities, for citizens writ large.
Thank you, Michael. David, would you like to give us some comments next?
Sure. My interest in this exact topic my New Yorker article began with my plumber. I had a plumbing disaster over Christmas, and when he came to my house, he said, there aren't enough of us now. What do you think it's going to be like in 10 years? And by then, not only because he'll probably be retired by then, but there's a whole large portion of his trade that's aging out of it. And I had a very interesting time visiting my state, Connecticut. It has a unique vocational high school system. It's a 17 public vocational high schools that are treated as a single district. They're run not by local school boards, but by a state committee whose chairman is appointed by the governor. The funding comes from the state. They're immune to a number of the problems that have beset local and regional school districts, and because of the way they have the support from unions, they have the support from contractors, support from politicians, support from environmentalists, many of whom don't agree about anything else. And it's kind of began to seem to me like sort of a almost magical way to bring together people who maybe don't agree about the underlying issue in a way that it advances it. So I had a great time. I ended up wishing that I hadn't spent so many years on French when I was in school myself and had been taking plumbing and electrical and carpentry. It certainly would have been of more use to me in my life as I've lived it than many of those other things.
Thanks, David. A lot of us took French in high school. I haven't used it since. Michael Grossman, would you like to give some comments?
Sure. Thank you very much. I also took French in high school, have used it since, but I think the overall comment that I would make, David, is that you're never too young to learn or never too old to learn. And I think that's a big part of both the opportunity and the challenge, if we talk about this, is that there's a tremendous opportunity to transform the U.S. economy in a way that is, Senator Markey and Ken Berlin talked about that it's just what an exciting time to see all of this capital deployed to transform into a more sustainable economy. But the labor force is a key enabling factor. And, we talk a lot about access to lithium and access to silicon and lots of inputs into the production and availability of green energy and a more sustainable economy. And putting it coldly, labor is an input that is really important, which has been significantly underinvested in for a long time. And we believe that, we've done some work, we've done some surveys and found that one of the biggest challenges that employers are facing is availability of skilled labor for these growing industries. I got to use my French when I lived in West Africa for a dozen years back in the 90s. And you used to see all these projects started by donors and they, build a school or build a hospital that remained empty because there was no one working them. There's no one there to work for them. And I'm terrified, put it, not exaggerating. I'm terrified that we're going to invest the $14 million that Senator Markey talked about across assets and infrastructure, and there's going to be no one to build them, and no one to maintain them, and no one to work them later. And so the opportunity, the labor shortage in the market that David just spoke about, the opportunity for organized labor that John referenced, and the demand that you see across all sizes of employers that Michael spoke about is a really exciting opportunity, and also the source of my biggest fear. Because how do these markets meet? There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of empty jobs and hundreds of thousands of unemployed. And what can we do as a group of people to help bring these markets into equilibrium? And I think part of that is where I started, is you're never too old to learn. And I think there's a serious opportunity to focus on training and upskilling.
Thanks, Michael. Well, that is the key question, is what can this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund do to augment the workforce in a way that we're all proud of? And Michael Dorsey, I want to go back to you. In what ways can this funding from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is going to be mostly lending, as I understand it, really support Black and brown communities in becoming part of good jobs in the green economy and also owning a portion of this transition?
Well, it's going to be a mixture of lending and grants. As Senator Markey said, we've got definitely not the 14 million that was just mentioned. It's more at 14 billion with a B. And that's just in the National Clean Investment Fund competition. You've got another 13-ish billion spread between two other efforts. One, as Senator mentioned, in the Solar for All effort, about 7 billion there. Another 6 billion in something called Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. So you've got a basket of programs. It's really great that the EPA, led by the unit, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Effort Unit, led by Jahi Wise, sort of on loan to EPA from the White House, stood up their implementation effort, just 2 weeks ago during Earth Week. So we've got a process now that sort of signals how the money is going to move. We fingers crossed that the EPA can get back to its EPA of old and moving the money out fast. EPA is not really known for that. The DOE certainly is. So folks have got to be, somewhat patient, but also somewhat nudging and pushing on the unit to move the resources quickly. Because there's actually going to be two tranches, a tranche this year, a tranche next year, hopefully. But we've got to, I think, also focus on making sure that those that are and have been the most impacted are really first to get these resources. And that's a process I think I've got great confidence in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction, office there, under Mr. Wise's leadership, that he's going to ensure that plays out. That's going to be really key. It's going to be key not just for communities, but for those that are on the sort of the capital side, as it were, the labor side as well, businesses as well as community initiatives. So we need a suite of processes. We got to be fast moving the money. We got to make sure that those have been left out of the equation get the money first and most, and then we've got to make sure that we're ready for that second round, next year.
Thanks, Michael. And John, we spoke yesterday, the IRA tax credits are linked to some extent to labor percentages, and given unions fund their own training programs, how can GGRF funding be used in coordination with that to increase the trained workforce in labor unions for the green economy?
So first, let me just say, I also took French all through grade school and high school and did go into the trades. So it's possible. There's still hope for everybody. But in terms of like how labor unions are set up and what we can provide, there has been, a long-term intentional divestment in vocational training across the country that has led to where we are right now. It's caused, a lot of the outside issues that exist in communities that funding could provide. What there's really a hole and need for is technical assistance, scalability, and wraparound services. So in a lot of these communities, you're trying to solve a lot of different issues at the same time. You also need a care economy that surrounds, that vocational training and kind of some management. Sorry, my light went off, but that's where, Michael just talked about the processes that have to be in place. We also have to match those processes to the components that are in that workforce development system and really, look at timelines of when we start educating, where money could be useful, putting money into K-12 schools to make sure that there's outreach, that there's career counselors, that are people that are promoting this type of work in this economy moving through, because we're looking at solving a problem that's created and fostered for, decades. In order to reverse that, we're going to have to get to the root of, where we need to build up in the first place. So getting to early education, talking to kids early about the climate and about our place in the world and what we can do for solutions and giving some hope, is definitely needed to get to a place where you actually have retention in these programs and interest in these programs and case management so that, as you're moving along. So this funding that's coming out, should be thought through strategically. Where do we need to plug the holes that don't already exist? In terms of labor unions, I'm one of, 12 different trades that each have, over 100 facilities that train people to careers in construction across the United States. We have 109 facilities. We're in every single state and every single region. We're taking in hundreds of people into these programs. We need to scale those programs. So where can we not just look at this funding and what this capital can do, but also where can we find funding that we can braid into that? So if we're looking at training WIOA funds into, some of that, hole that's needed. If we're looking at DOL grants and workforce development grants through the Department of Energy, and what we can also compile that, because it really is a major scale that we have to, get to and accomplish in order to see the energy transition. What we don't want to do is slow deployment. And the one thing that can slow deployment is a shortage of workers, right? So projects scale back, everything gets on hold. Contractors don't have the confidence to bid on projects because they don't have an available workforce pool with the skills needed. So we have to be intentional about all these funds and how we are looking at the workforce development system as a whole.
Thanks, John. And David, you spent some time with, students, younger students who were effectively reached out to and got interested in these trades. Can you talk about what works to get young people interested in joining the trades?
I think the strongest tool that we have is probably the cost of college, and it's college has become so expensive, and the kids who pile up debt and graduate without jobs for a long time. The big headlines and were all these amazing perks that people were getting when they went to work at Google or at Amazon. All these places that are now laying off tens of thousands of people. And the kids that I met, the Connecticut system is set up so that it's on a rotating 2-week cycle. They're 2 weeks in their trade, then 2 weeks in academics. They graduate with a regular high school diploma, but they also have 720 hours of theory toward their licenses in their trades. And because they're not leaving their trade when a bell rings, they're able to, the school contracts projects with local homeowners. They'll do at like 5% of the cost of using a regular contractor. As the teacher told me, he said that projects take a lot longer, and sometimes people are a little freaked out when a school bus with 18 kids shows up. But the kids get practical training, and then they're also, when they're juniors and seniors, they're able to take on part-time jobs outside of school and actually leave school to work and earn money. And those part-time jobs very often turn into full-time jobs when they graduate. So it was one of the principals of one of the schools told me, he said, we have kids who come from very difficult economic backgrounds, and they are, pillars of their family, not only because their education, it's a public high school. They're not paying for their training in their trade. And they're also on the side, they're earning money. And, then when they graduate, they often step into $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year jobs. And so I think that there's for years, decades, there's been a de-emphasis on vocational training in schools, as has been said. And there's also, just that we've just beaten into people's heads the idea that the only way to have a decent life in the United States is to graduate from college. And now we see that there's a downside to that too. And so I remember there was a representative from the laborers union. The laborers have in this region, there are 2 residential schools, training schools that kids can go, and they live in dormitories and they learn a full spectrum of skills. And he said that one of the biggest challenges he has is persuading parents that laborer doesn't mean sweeper. And I think so it's persuading parents too, that this is especially white collar parents, that it's okay for a kid who isn't interested in college. You don't have to beat it into them that they have to go. There are these amazing opportunities that have an upside for the parents too.
That's interesting. And lastly, Michael Grossman, you are doing some work with career impact bonds, which is really fascinating. And as we have more funding coming from the federal government, if you could talk a little bit what those career impact bonds are and how the GDRF might be able to augment the impact of that program.
Yeah, thank you very much, Libby. I mean, I think this is such an interesting discussion. If you look at the growth of the green energy jobs over the next 10 years, BLS put out some information that was even, before the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was announced, that showed, solar voltaic installers and offshore wind technicians to be two of the largest expected growing employment sources in the US over the next 10 years. And now that's obviously going to be magnified. We believe that about 40 to 60% of those jobs do not require an advanced degree. And these are high paying jobs with potential for career pathways to lead to greater high paying jobs and career advancement. And we're really excited about that. We find that, to reference the question you asked earlier, we find that it's both the ability to finance training, but the ability to finance life while in training is what constrains a lot of non-traditional entrants into the trades. And so we look forward to helping develop financing products that will both finance people's access to upskilling directly, but also create financing products will allow people to persist in their training by providing financing for things like the wraparound services that John was talking about, for things like career placement, for things simply like the cost of living while in a apprenticeship program, which may not be paying a wage that is livable in certain metropolitan areas in the United States today. So to help finance that transition in the labor force, we would be interested in putting our Career Impact Bond program in place. Career Impact Bond program, really simply put, is an outcomes-based loan where we finance upskilling at zero cost upfront to learners. We generally work with training providers who are we diligence based on their ability to both attract and recruit specific desirable populations, what people want to recruit, as well as train and place those people into jobs. This is all very data driven. And then we would seek to repay our financing from the change in income realized by learners, and only when they have an income above a minimum income threshold. So a lot of talk that's been around over the last couple of years about income share agreements. And we all know the income share agreement experience has been relatively predatory. For a lot of people, if you can't access credit in the United States from traditional credit channels, credit can be very, very expensive. We are structuring the Career Impact Bond to support learners in a way that, as I said, is zero risk to them. The only risk they're taking is their time. If the training doesn't lead to them to get a higher income right away, then they have no financial obligation. We find that partnering these kind of structures with employers is really powerful because, as everyone has noted earlier, it's really challenging for employers to find workers today. And so their ability to finance training and finance the cost of living while in training, we believe is really attractive to the partnership that we can develop between labor and management over time.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Dorsey, I wanted to go back to you. So the enterprises that are part of Black-owned solar, I'm sorry, I keep mixing up this name.
You get Libby Boss.
I remember Boss.
The Boss, Black owners of solar services. Piece of cake.
So the people that are bosses, right? How has finance helped them be successful, make their businesses successful, or access to finance? So
look, we've got to do a couple of things. First and foremost, certainly for business owners, particularly in the renewable space, we've got to make the capital really cheap and cheaper still. And we've also got to make it really fast. We can't have 20th century thinking for 21st century problems here, where to do less than a megawatt projects, particularly resi and light commercial, you go through onerous diligence processes that aren't automated in the slightest. This is the characterization of a lot of commercial capital. That problem is one I think we may see, hopefully we're going to avoid with standing up the greenhouse gas reduction effort initiative. We've got to have processes to access this money and get it out the door really quickly. We've got to have really resources for businesses, Black, brown, and otherwise, that's going to be, really fit for purpose to get us out ahead of this problem. We've also got to see in places like from the philanthropic sector on the, PRI side of the house, investment side of the philanthropies, we've got to see their money at least scale to be fit for purpose for this moment. We just saw essentially 1,000x scaling from the federal government. So if you're sitting in a philanthropy and you haven't done double, let alone 10x or 100x, or at least thought about a pathway to get there, then you're behind the 8 ball, so to speak. You're doing 20th century work in the 21st century. So people have got to move those conversations, not at next quarter's meeting, but really today, and you got to track it really on a monthly basis to move the money out fast. So it's going to be about getting cheap resources to businesses so they can be leading in this effort, particularly Black and brown businesses. That's why we created Black Owners of Solar Services almost 3 years ago, okay? Thinking about this moment, knowing this moment was going to come. We were working on this years ago, not even thinking about, well, what if there would be an IRA, et cetera, but knowing that we've got to get out ahead of this unfolding climate crisis. Then secondly, we've got to get that money you've got to move it quickly, but you've got to reduce the sort of barriers to get it in the first place. And you've got to do that because the science says. You can't say on the one hand, we believe in the science and there's this urgency here to get out ahead of this problem, and then come up with a whole sea of bureaucracies and barriers and red tape to access quick money. And then you've got to be thinking about, if you are sitting on top of capital, wherever it is, whether it's in a government agency, whether it's in your foundation, whether it's in your commercial bank, wherever it is, how are we going to, at barest minimum, double it? If you're not doubling it and folks are 1,000xing it, you're behind. Fast, easy to access, scaling it up. Do those 3 things. Will save a lot of people's lives.
Yes, if I could ask a follow-up question, a lot of the GTRF funding is ideally going to national green banks and to other green banks. What would make the application to a green bank really possible for a Black-owned business or minority-owned business to successfully get that funding really quickly? How could they shape that application process?
Well, the green bank infrastructure has been in place for a little bit of, I'll say a few minutes now. You've got about 3 dozen of those green banks around the country, from Montgomery County up to, Connecticut. You're going to hear from Brian Garcia a little bit later on this discussion today, out to Michigan. Michigan Saves, not called a green bank, but it's been there for a while. 20 million moved in Michigan just last year. So those existing infrastructures, they've got to stand up processes to be able to onboard new sort of beneficiaries, as it were, folks that are going to come in and get loans, going to get access to equity. Some of those banks have got that infrastructure. They've got to prepare for more to access that because we know more and more are coming. That's been catalyzed by just the IRA itself. So that's something that we can work on now to prepare for that going forward.
Great, thanks. And on the topic of getting a diverse workforce to really benefit from the clean energy transition, Don, what have been the historical challenges for unions to recruit from a diverse population, and what are the opportunities and successes that you're having now in changing that landscape?
So the factors are vast. One is, we're not as big as we once were, right? Our locals are called local because we were local. That has largely moved to a regional structure where you have less people, less resources, because of policies that are out there that chip away at union resources. So we're not as big in capacity as we are to get out there. There is also, historical racism that has, been in everywhere, that we are, breaking down barriers now and pulling that apart and, doing a lot of outreach, not just in who we're recruiting for apprenticeship, but also in leadership, so that we have, more people to get out and actually have these conversations that have lived experiences, preferably in construction, that can talk to kids and really motivate them because they see themselves, right? So those are some of the things my organization in particular is fully invested in and has been out and doing this work. We recently where there was no relationship in Kentucky, in some of these rural areas, there just hasn't been the capacity to outreach or perform that work at all because there's nobody there. But in Kentucky, we recently, helped accelerate that with, reconnecting a relationship there to a program that brings in, I think 300 people a year into the construction trades through those communities. So it's really about finding those stakeholders, finding those partners that are doing the work, and help lift them up, right? Share resources with them and get out to as many stakeholders you can and spread the word. Because again, it goes back to, how this workforce development system looks in 2023 versus how it looked in 1950, right? So changing the dynamics there and making sure that we're incorporated pre-apprenticeship programs, career pathway programs, apprenticeship readiness, vocational schools. I think the Department of Labor calls it no doors closed approach, in how they're looking at youth apprenticeship, right? So getting out to all those vehicles that can create funnel systems, talking to more stakeholders in the community, a lot of community-based organizations that have roots that have had an interest in workforce development forever that have been trying to get in touch. It's really, where there has been no capacity for communication, we have to kind of look at how we're spending that money as well and be more strategic about how we're promoting these careers, how we're doing outreach, how we're doing recruitment, and making sure that, that's part of the puzzle,
Makes a lot of sense to me. Other panelists, did you guys have reactions to that comment? Just a question. I think union outreach is something we're all sort of very interested at this juncture.
Libby, if I could just add one thing in there. So the construction industry also is very transient, right? You have project to project to project done by multiple contractors. So the journey for that worker going from project to project to company, there's sometimes lag time, there's layoffs, there's in-betweens. That's helped by, unemployment programs and things like that to get through there. But I think a lot of where this money is coming from, we're looking at one particular fund, a greenhouse gas fund that does one thing, right? We're looking at, other programs out of the Department of Energy that are also going to fund the same type of jobs. So in a union program, and you have transferable skills, so that as a lot more of these projects are funded, as a lot more contractors are being brought into that base, you have a lot more opportunity for people to go from job to job. We always had the mantra that we don't organize for jobs that don't exist, right? Now we've kind of flipped that. Now we have a ton of jobs that are going to exist and not enough people. So we've got to, figure out how we all work together to get that done.
So, as we've deployed, we manage, 4 different vehicles where we deploy impact first capital to support upskilling, a couple $100 million. And what we've learned while doing this is that the training itself really matters, but it's actually not the only thing that matters. And it's probably only gets you halfway there. And building all the support systems to allow persistence and to provide access and a conduit into the formal sector labor market, into career pathways, takes as much work as the actual learn to be an electrician or learn to be an HVAC repair person. And it requires working with community organizations who have a deep understanding of the communities from which we're trying to recruit. And, there's lots of expressions that people use that sound really glib and interesting. And I'm not one to generally use those, but, meeting the candidates where they are is really important. And we're at a time where it's easier it's not easier. It's imperative for employers to do that, given the situation in the labor market, that the idea of actually investing in labor in a way through community organizations and developing these partnerships to build sustainable funnels, I think is, it feels to me like this is the first time it feels this way since the 1970s. And it's, I think it's a really important opportunity and a really exciting opportunity to rectify some of the inequities between capital and labor over the last 20 years.
Michael Dorsey and David, I saw you guys nodding along.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's this extraordinary opportunity, and that, it's at least it's in theory a little bit ideology proof, because you don't have to believe in climate change. You don't have to believe in employment equity. You don't have to believe in environmental justice. All you have to do is believe in jobs. And so I said in my article, I said all the kids that I met were aware of the environmental impact of the projects that they were working on, but none of them, I'm sure, none of the ones that I met had signed up had applied to tech school because they were worried about climate change. It was because the family members who were in a trade, because they were worried about the price of cost of college, or their parents were, because they didn't want to go to college, they didn't like reading, they didn't like studying, they wanted to do something else. And so I think it's a relief for you that you don't have to sort of pound on people with an idea that, it's a good thing, and it leads to many purposes. Now, there were the classes that I visited, the schools I visited were much more diverse than the high school that I went to, the college I went to, and yet there is still students who are hard to read, students who have had no experience of anything working out basically in their life. And it's not just enough to say, this is a great pathway to a good career for you. It takes real support. And I don't know how that's done, but I think that's a key thing too. And you also have to guard against the exploitation of people, of all sorts of people, by there are going to be, private trade schools that are going to pop up that are going to cost as much as college and are going to not necessarily lead into the kinds of jobs that we're talking about. So that's something to, I don't know how, luckily that's not my job. You guys can figure that out.
I mean, the one thing I've got to add, folks, and this is for everybody listening, the reality of the matter is that both the commodity chain of new energy, clean energy, renewable energy, as well as the capital stack is absolutely diverse, always has been, will continue to be, needs to certainly be fortified to be more, and that's certainly underway. But we should not leave this conversation thinking, well, it's only about diversity on the labor side, when the reality is we've got diversity on the capital side as well, and both sides have got to be supported. And that's certainly really the core, the sine qua non, as it were, of Black owners of solar services, to fortify those Black owners, hence the title, hence the name, really because those owners of capital, as it were, if we go back to old school theory that I know John hopefully knows very well, and hopefully some of the rest of you in the audience as well, they face certain barriers as well. And those barriers aren't just going to go away because we've seen, many X of new resources put into the system. So this is about fortifying labor, fortifying diverse, places on the capital stack as well. It's got to be both and, or we're not going to get this done. And it's also got to be non-US, but that's probably another panel.
That's a good point. Okay, great. We're going to take questions from the audience in a minute, and if we don't have any, I'll keep going. But love to get some audience thoughts. I'll just add one thing. I'll jump on the panel here. My project with Block Power, we have a civilian climate corps that's funded by the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice here in New York City. And a couple of the panelists have mentioned the importance of wraparound services and the fact that a free training is free, but you're not at a job getting paid during that time. And one thing that has been really unique about this grant is there is a large stipend for participants that are taking a 12-week training. They're getting paid $20 an hour, 8 hours a day. And that has enabled the Block Power program to really reach a segment of the population that needs a lot of support to get onto a good path for a career. And I think one thing that is interesting to bring up relevant to that program is we're serving individuals who have a lot of barriers to employment, and we don't screen on the way into the program. So there's no 8th grade reading test, et cetera. And so some of our job placement numbers are lower than other programs because we don't do that type of screening. And yet what I'm proud of is not that we have outcomes, we're placing 90% of our graduates in XYZ, but we're having impact. We're showing individuals who have a really difficult path forward to get them into careers, and those people are inspiring their communities, supporting their communities financially. There's a lot to be said, I think, for impact versus outcomes as funding is being dispersed. And that makes it harder for something like career bonds or career impact bonds that Michael Grossman has been speaking about, because you can't always pay back a bond very well if you're really focusing on people with the highest barriers to employment. We sort of need, I think we've been talking about a very broad tool set to create the workforce that we want to see for the clean energy transition. And with that, let me open it up for audience questions, and then we'll go continue our discussion.
While you're waiting to receive audience questions, I would just like to agree with what you just said, Libby, is that, different tools are to achieve different things. And then the range of jobs and the range of people that we're talking about will require a differentiated set of tools, right? Our tool works where, training results in a significant and sustained income increase, and which then you'd expect people to pay back. We can all agree that somebody making $20 an hour in New York City probably doesn't have a lot of margin for paying back any kind of debt. So for certain jobs, they're not what we would call, even in our hyper student friendly, financeable jobs. And that's probably most appropriate then to use grant capital for. But there are, if we're looking to sustain and amplify capital availability and pay it forward into the future, then we believe that there are some jobs that are financeable. And those are the ones that lead to immediately higher pay and an attractive career pathway.
I don't know who is managing questions from the audience or how that works.
There's that little Q&A box on the bottom.
Are you reading these? I'm sorry. Frank, do you want to step in and give me some support? No questions right now. Okay, great. Great. Well, I did have, Michael Dorsey, were you going to say something?
Well, I can speak to one in the Q&A because it's one that we've been working on. And again, well before IRA, and we'll continue to do this. And this is in the wearing my ASU hat. The question is about red states. Look, as many of you folks on the stage know, and certainly hopefully in the audience, I've never been aligned with elephants or jackasses and never probably will be. The fact is that when you get out of the sounds circular screaming of MSNBC and Fox foolishness, you find that people that are serious are looking for jobs to benefit their community, whether they're in red or blue states, and many, quite a number of folks that you would assume otherwise if you're in those sound bubbles, they've been fighting for this stuff and working on this stuff, and that's, I think, true from Miami to Maine, and Connecticut to California, and Detroit to Des Moines, and all points in between and beyond, up in Seattle as well. So we're going to see, and we are seeing folks in red states work on this stuff because they've been doing it. Look, we've seen almost a 2-decade explosion in wind in North Texas because of some red administrations. Despite the antics of that current governor there yammering on about solar and stuff, he knows where the money is. And so you look at what's going on there, you see these realities. And so that's just the answer to that one question. And I think we need to, those of us who are arguably ostensibly leading this effort, need to work and support nationwide. And why? Not because, well, you got to hold your nose with this and that politics, because that's the only way to do this. You can't pretend or accept that there is a bona fide global and certainly national climate catastrophe playing out before our eyes and say, oh, we're only going to work with these folks over here. That's called foolishness. So if we're serious, it's all in, and all in who wants to work and solve this problem. Nothing to debate.
If I could add to that, there's also, energy companies are concerned about energy, right? So whether that is fossil fuel or whether that's clean energy, they're looking to build their businesses. We communicate with a lot of energy companies pretty regularly because we represent workers on both sides of that spectrum. And they are looking for, where they can supply workers to move that to. In terms of like, whether they're transitioning or not, they're looking at their bottom lines. They're looking at where their investments and where they're going to make money, right? So these investments to incentivize, all companies to move to there, they're still going to, look for workforce solutions regardless of what state. I would say that it's definitely not because there's better wages and better benefits in those states, being that there is lower union density. So, I mean, if we're looking at the larger solution, and if this panel is about workforce and we're looking to those red states, we should look to what policies need to be in place that are working well for workforce in other areas that could then create better pay and better wages in those areas, being that they are going to build these things regardless. There is money there to do it. They're incentivized to do it. We got to, make sure our focus is on what that workforce looks like and how they are better off financially at the end of this couple decades of investment.
And I think that's really important that we underline that last point that John made, which is we really do need that people are going to make these investments anyway. And, I remember being out in Central Valley in California a couple of years ago and seeing these machines dropping tiny droplets of water on seeds. And those used to be people. And then we were pretty good at controlling immigration, no matter what some people may say. And there's less available farm workers. So people invented machines to do that. If we don't address the workforce question around clean energy, people are going to continue this investment with this money, and there will be technological solutions that will replace labor. And there'll be yet another whole change in our economy that's going to leave the same people behind. So this is really essential. This is not a nice to have. This is kind of an essential, both for enabling the economy in the short term, the green transition in the short term, but also to make sure that we have an inclusive economy going forward with opportunities for people to excel and thrive in the absence of a college degree.
I did have one other topic we haven't talked about much, which is how to engage the business community in these objectives. So does anyone have thoughts on how businesses can better engage communities, and what are the best places for them to start?
On that, I'll steal a little bit of Michael Grossman's thunder. I think, meeting communities where they are, working certainly with those that have been, harmed by the 20th century, energy racism, energy injustice in this country. We got to do a lot of work there. We got to move resources to communities as well. We've got to build partnerships, from the business and labor side that are fit for purpose and scale. We got to do what John has said, work and target those areas where we have that low union density to build up, just jobs that are, have meaningful wages and meaningful benefits. The reality is that if we don't pay attention here, we could easily build a green energy oligarchy. Right now, the biggest solar installer on the resi side, the residential side, is owned, majority controlled by Total Oil. Now, all fairness, all disclosure, we work with SunPower. Let's call the name, but we've got to make sure that we have a just approach to doing this, and that means one that is just and fair, working with communities, but also just and fair in moving resources to communities and with diverse businesses. We fail on those sort of 3 points, with labor, working justly with labor, working justly with diverse businesses, working justly with communities. We're going to recreate some problems of the 21st century just with a green face on it, and it's going to be a green monster.
Let's hope not.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, let's hope not. And I'm excited by the opportunity that the groups like this present to not do that. I was talking a different industry earlier this year or late last year, was speaking to a group of hospital presidents. And, hospital presidents aren't exactly known as being like hyperbolic people. And they describe the workforce challenges they're facing today as existential. And I think when you can engage companies' interests, when they're confronted with challenges that actually impact their bottom line. There's been years of saying, we're all for workforce, we love labor, we like people, but behavior hasn't really followed suit because capital's been cheap and we've been able to replace labor with capital in lots of different ways. I think that we're at a point right now where labor is difficult to access. The difficulty in accessing labor is actually having a significant impact on people's bottom line. Someone said earlier, employers won't engage, or contractors won't engage in projects if they're not comfortable with their ability to deliver because of lack of labor. So it's constraining growth and it's constraining existence. And so I think getting people's attention is not the hard part. I think being able to provide solutions that keep people at the table is really is going to be the challenge for all of us, because obviously technological solutions are a lot cleaner than human solutions.
I'd add to that and just say that, this is really why we need to be talking to every stakeholder in that supply chain, right? Because contractors need to have that buy-in to workforce development. They need to know what their role is going to be to make sure that that workforce is coming up and retained. And part of that is, placing people from programs and, making sure that they understand the apprenticeship system is that you are, getting somebody who is a little bit less skilled, less, on the production scale than somebody who is a journeyman that's been doing it 25 years, and make sure that they keep that person through the process so that they have that mentorship coming into the program. Mentorship is going to help retainment. It's going to help putting people under the wing, but and we're talking about at scale, right? It's good for one contractor to do it, but we have to have that conversation in these contractor association meetings, right? So I think we should bring this panel to all of those contractor association conferences that are happening around the country. But also we're talking about people on workforce development boards. We're talking about people on school boards. We're talking about people in community-based organizations. We're talking about all the applicants that are looking to receive this money that need to understand how that workforce development system should work. So making sure that everybody has buy-in to the process, I think, is going to be key.
John, I have a question for you, which is something that I heard about. I don't fully understand, which has to do with limitations on the number of apprentices that a contractor can take on based on state rules, based on number of journey persons they employ, and it limits in some cases their ability to take on not completely trained workers. I know that the schools are able to sort of get around some of it because they have juniors and seniors on, they have juniors and seniors on different days. You can have a junior and a senior sharing a single pre-apprenticeship, so they don't push the contractor over a line. But are there state rules that are or union rules that need to be modified to open some things up a little more?
So I think it's actually, wherever that narrative is coming from, it's actually flipped on its head. We actually bargain for apprenticeship ratios in our collective bargaining agreements. The problem is being able to enforce them, right? So a lot of our contracts say a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio. In the Inflation Reduction Act, the Department of Labor calls for a 4-to-1 ratio because they had a secretary who was a building trades president and knows the challenges there to get people to actually do it. So in terms of opening it up, the rules against having too many apprentices are more based on so that you don't upend and contractors aren't able to game the system and take advantage of putting on 9 apprentices and 2 journeymen so that they get a discount on the labor, being that they're judging that they don't need as many skills as they need to get through apprenticeship as we do, right? So what they're doing is building that narrative so that they get a discount on labor versus how many apprentices that they can take on. We're more than happy to give them 10 apprentices, but we also want to give them 40 journeymen, right? To make sure that the job gets done on time, on budget, because we also have a reputation for training to uphold too, So if that job comes in under because they've upended with apprentices, then that contractor has trouble with that general contractor. That general contractor has trouble with that developer. So we've kind of been doing this for over 100 years. So we know how we'd like to get those ratios, and definitely it's in the IRA because of our advocacy and making sure that we do get at least 1 apprentice on with every 4 contractors. The issue is going to be enforcement. Are we able to and make sure and document that those apprentices actually received a quarter of the hours on that project that person does. So that plays into the whole equity and diversity piece, is that the more that we can document hours that we're actually given, because what happens a lot of times is we get policies in place, we get responsible contractor ordinances, we get, if anybody is stuck on my accent, the Boston residence job policy says that, you will have so many residents, so many apprentices, things like that. But what happens is a lot of contractors will go into that available workforce pool. Again, going back to, how those out of work lists work, and whether or not is racism that exists there. They'll hire somebody just to meet that quota for that time period, for that one project that they have, and then immediately let that person go as long as they don't have to meet that quota anymore. So changing that to hours rather than hires shows that that person is actually getting a long-term outcome from that. So, that's something that we look to meet. That's something that we need to educate more people on what enforcement measures need to be in place to ensure that we do have larger apprenticeship ratios. But I'm actually so happy you asked that question, because that is one thing that, if anything, that needs to get out there in this.
Well, we ended on a passionate note, and I appreciate that. So we'll wrap up now. Thank you all so much. This was a great discussion to be part of, and I'll turn it back over to Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. And I'd like to thank us. I learned a lot from the panel. I hope everybody else did, and everybody did a great job. So thank you. The next panel, Coordinating Labor Practices to Achieve a Just Transition, is going to be moderated by Will Barber. Will and I are former colleagues. He is here today to talk about it really in his role as Chief Consultant of Environmental Justice and Equity at the Coalition for Green Capital. A little bit more about yourself and introduce the other panelists. And thank you again. Thank you, everybody on the first panel.
Thank you, Ken. And just, let's send another round of appreciation to our first panel for kicking us off with a powerful start. I am excited to continue this conversation. So much knowledge being dropped, and I am excited to introduce to you all a powerful lineup of panelists, to continue us on for the next few minutes. As mentioned, my name is William J. Barber III. I am the Chief Consultant of Environmental Justice and Equity at Coalition for Green Capital, also founder and CEO of Rural Beacon Initiative that works as a small business to increase BIPOC ownership in renewable energy and regenerative ag. So very close to what we are talking about today. We are joined by three esteemed panelists. These folks work in this field day in and day out as visionaries on how do we get this right. I'm going to do very quick intros for them. If I read their entire biographies, we will take up our entire time, but let's dive in. So Jessie Buendia is the National Director of Green for All, which is an initiative of dream.org that works at the intersection of the environmental, economic, and racial justice movements to advance solutions to poverty and pollution. Before coming to Green for All, Jessie served as the acting executive director, chief deputy director of the California Strategic Growth Council under the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Jessie has overseen a $1 billion annual budget and launched two new programs, the Community Assistance for Climate Equity Program and the Health and Equity Program that expanded SGC's reach and impact in communities across California and propelled SGC as a leader on equity at the state level. She's accomplished many other accomplishments in terms of advancing racial equity and environmental energy justice. Thank you for joining us, Jessie. Raya Salter, colloquially known as the Climate Auntie, is an attorney, consultant, educator, and clean energy law and policy expert who focuses on energy and climate justice. Raya is the founder of the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center and a member of the New York State Climate Action Council, the body that developed New York's plan to implement the nation's leading climate law. Raya also sits as a member of CGC's Environmental Justice Advisory Board that has been helping the Coalition for Green Capital really embrace our just transition strategy. Raya is an environmental justice advisor to the House Oversight Committee and the House Natural Resources Committee, and has testified twice before Congress. She is also an adjunct professor of law at Cardozo Law School and has written widely on energy policy. Her book, Energy Justice, Domestic and International Perspectives, was released in 2018. Thank you so much for joining us today, Raya. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Brian Garcia is the president and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, the nation's first state-level green bank. The green bank model is demonstrating how smarter use of public resources can attract more private investment in the green economy while reducing energy burdens on families and businesses and creating jobs at the local level. Before joining the Green Bank, Garcia was program director for the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, where he led efforts to develop a leading global program responsible for preparing environmental leaders for business and society. He holds a BS degree in political economy of natural resources from Berkeley, a master's of public administration and public and nonprofit administration from NYU Wagner, and an MBA in finance from NYU Stern, and an MEM degree from the Yale School of the Environment. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. We're going to dive right in with initial questions. We're hearing a lot about the needs and how do we center low-income and disadvantaged communities in this unique moment, historic moment, where we're talking about a massive overhaul of capital, a massive overhaul of our economic system. From you all's perspective, and we'll popcorn it, what are the most pressing needs on the ground in low-income and disadvantaged communities related to this green transition? Raya, I'll start with you.
I think when we want to talk about what are the most pressing problems, I think as much as we're seeing a transformation, we want to seize that. I think that frontline communities who have done the work in many cases to determine what it is they need, and we need to focus on that, are in a complete energy and environmental crisis. We've got sky-high rates of pollution, sky-high co-pollutants, the horrible impact, economic and health impacts of COVID that are interrelated. So we've got urban heat island effects that are worsening. So I think that it's important to see the urgency of our energy and environmental justice challenges in terms of where we are now, and then, really focus on what is the opportunity to meet that. That's my initial response, is that we are in crisis and we have to rapidly figure out how we're going to deploy these solutions equitably.
Thank you. Jesse, same question.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this esteemed panel. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is that many entities within the green sector do not have the competencies of being able to work within low-income communities and communities of color. And so one of the recognitions we have is that these are communities that are impacted by multiple societal and economic challenges occurring at once. And how do you have sort of an all-community approach to being able to bring solutions, especially when we're really trying to target the communities most impacted by poverty and pollution at the same time. The other thing that I would also just mention is our esteemed panel that went first really hit home when they talked about how important it is to invest in the workforce through education, access to capital, and professional development. And I think we haven't always linked the opportunities to create work and wealth opportunities with also greenhouse gas reduction for the communities that we're most concerned about. And so that's something that we're really excited to be able to tackle through this opportunity with GGRF.
Absolutely. Brian, over to you with the same question.
All right. Well, let me say, William, that you appropriately have that angelic glow right behind you. You're right on all of us and inspires all of us to continue doing what we're doing. I always feel like I lean on the key input, which is investment. So how to enable as much public and private investment as we can in low income and disadvantaged communities, vulnerable communities, environmental justice communities, however we want to talk about these communities. Investment to me feels like the front end thing that we need to enable more of. Now we've been having conversations about workforce and other things which have me rethinking the inputs and the outputs and the outcomes that we're after. But to me, it feels like investment upfront is really important. And just kind of thinking about some of the work we're doing here in Connecticut, on the single family low income side, by providing easy and affordable access to families to capital to finance solar, we're actually helping them reduce energy burden. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Shalonda Baker where she said, Brian, that's all well and good, but that is not enough. Like, we've got to go further. So these conversations that we're having today around the workforce and how to ensure that this green economy that we're building, hearing Senator Markey's Green New Deal and the challenges of jobs and people and all of that is really the opportunity that's in front of us. I think investment still is a key input, but there are lots of other key things that are popping up in my mind today, just listening into everybody's conversation. So good to be with you all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we're just going to have a conversation as we catch our stride, because I know there is so much knowledge and good information that you all have to share, with our attendees. Want to push it a little further, looking at some of the labor statistics as we talk about the energy workforce. Right now, the U.S. energy workforce is 74% male compared to the national average of 53%. Non-white workers represent 26% of the energy workforce compared to the national average of 22%. So we're above and doing well when we look at diversity in the aggregate, but there's still disparity, especially when we look at Black or African-American representation, which is 8% of the energy workforce compared to the national average of 12% of the population. When we talk about efforts around diversifying the workforce along the lines of race, along the lines of gender, along the lines of geography even, why is that so critical? And what are some of the best practices that you all have seen in your work, in your fields, to make these goals a reality? Jesse, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, you are stating some really important facts about just barriers to entry into the green economy. As much as we get young people excited about being able to enter, there are not clear pathways that explain to people how they're going to be able to sort of level up into high paying careers, through specific tracks. And so I think the career education piece that folks spoke about in the first panel is incredibly important, making more visible what the actual opportunities look like, having more mentorship programs with people of color, women, other folks actually have people who look like them in those places. The role and the responsibility of both government, media, and nonprofits to raise the visibility of innovators of color in this space so that we are actually changing the narrative from, bad things happen to people of color to people of color at the front end of being able to provide solutions. And you could be a part of that too. And so I think for our organization, it's been really important to be able to work at the beginning of the pipeline in regards to providing scholarship opportunities for people of color to enter into the green economy, the clean energy economy, but also this idea of you can both go the trades route, the career route, or you could also consider opening your own business. And what does that look like? And so we've been lifting up entrepreneurs of color through our Green for All Business Council as important parts of the actual solution.
So appreciate that answer, Jesse. And I know you and I and others have had many dialogues that in this moment, we really have to have an approach where this cannot be done to communities or for communities, have to be done with, and that we cannot silo communities into this limited box of only being new markets for clean product and clean project deployment, that we really have to think about the workforce components, but dare I even say also the ownership components, which we heard on the prior panel. So really appreciate those comments. I'll go reverse course. Brian, I'll come to you to take us and share us your thoughts on best practices as we diversify the clean energy workforce.
Yeah, so I think building from your comment there, William, in terms of equity, like right now in front of us, we have a really unique opportunity to ensure that our Black and brown and tribal and underserved communities can be lifted up in this economy that we're building, given, the investment tax credit structure as an example, right? It feels like there's a little bit of a stick there in terms of maximizing your 30% on the investment tax credit. So you've got your prevailing wage and apprenticeship work that you got to lift up in order for you to receive those, the full advantage of the tax credits. And then the opportunity across the board on all of those adders. Are you in an energy community, 10% adder? Are you low income tribal community, 10 to 20% adder? Are you using domestic content made in America, another 10% adder, right? So a lot of the values that Senator Markey talked about, a lot of the that Biden leans on in terms of just transition and Justice 40 are staring us right in the face right now in terms of lifting up economic investment opportunities in our vulnerable communities. In Connecticut, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of lifting up our Black and brown workforce. We're behind when we look at the percent of workforce. Same thing with women versus men in our economy. What are the role of green banks in this context? How can we use our tool of the Community Act? One of the fundamental principles of green banks is to use a limited amount of public to mobilize private. Well, what about the Community Reinvestment Act? What can we do to engage our local financial institutions in investing in less than 80% area median income communities? Not only families and businesses, but what can they do to invest in the companies like we were hearing before from Boss? Putting that access to capital, making it easy. So I think there's a lot of things still on the docket for us all to figure out, but the tools are all there. We just have to move them in the right direction.
Thank you, Brian. Coming to you, Raya, and just wanting to acknowledge you have a unique perspective on this topic, being on both sides of the equation in many ways, as both an environmental and energy justice advocate, having a career deeply in that field, but also, as your work with the New York Council, on the policy side, the implementation side, and making sure that financial resources reach communities. Can you share with us your perspective on best practices to diversify this workforce?
Yeah, this is such an incredibly important issue. And, in New York State, just late last year, we approved a very progressive climate plan. And through the New York State process, we had an actual just transition workforce group that was put together to actually do a job study and look at, what are we looking at in terms of jobs in New York State? And just by 2030, we're looking at over 170,000 jobs, in the clean energy sector, a big chunk of that being in buildings. And so we really are at the end, straight off the presses in New York State. Literally, the New York State budget was approved last night, and we're all combing through things. But the question we've all been asking ourselves is, how are we going to pay for this? And in New York State, it looks like we will be moving towards some type of cap and invest program that is partnered with our state mandate to focus our state Justice 40 to focus on disadvantaged communities, which nobody likes. That's our term of art. We got it from California. Nobody likes it. We say priority communities, frontline communities. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. We have completed our definition of who qualifies to be a priority community. So we stand at the precipice of having this investment portion done in a way that, the intent is that it's done to benefit frontline communities with a mandate to do so. Yet, as we stand on this precipice, we do, to your point before, in terms of, structural racism, where folks are in the workforce, we do not have that infrastructure, for this new clean energy workforce that is going to, or an adequate infrastructure to ensure that we get the job penetration amongst all the folks that we are seeking to see that happen. So we've got infrastructure, to the points that folks on this panel and the previous panel had made. We have a lot of folks who do community-based work, who do community-based outreach, who use traditional one-stop models, other types of, job outreach models that are in most cases completely unfamiliar with what the green workforce is, are completely unfamiliar what this green job framework will look like, because it's up until now been largely abstract. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, and I do think it needs to be done in empowering the community, the wraparound services, the community-based organizations, the financiers, the folks who are clamoring, I think, who need to be made aware and are clamoring to get in the game, but have those actual on-the-ground relationships to be able to increase diversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan, for that. And I want to stay right there for a quick second with you. We have a little time here, and, I think it's so important that as we meet this moment, that we explicitly name that communities that find themselves as disadvantaged, as impacted, as frontline communities, it was not just happenstance that led to these communities facing these realities and disparate outcomes. Can you just give us a little bit of a crash course so that we are bringing in full awareness on some of the historic disparities that led to these outcomes, where we now have to prioritizing redressing some of the harm that have made communities now more vulnerable to the global climate crisis?
I mean, I could say two things: reparations, land back. But I mean, we are seeing, in this country, I am the descendants, of enslaved folks who were brought to this country in chains. We know that there has long been a pattern of structural racism, that the climate crisis was born from out of that heart of inequality, overconsumption, exploitation, land degradation, and land theft. And so it's important, however, as much as we see that, the history of how infrastructure and housing and other ways that society is structured have been created unequally and have created climate vulnerability and environmental burden disproportionately onto Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's also important to remember that from a GHG perspective, we have seen, as much as we've seen this, ramp up of GHGs since the Industrial Revolution, the majority of the carbon has been emitted since the late 80s and 90s. So we are talking about a crisis that has intensified in our lifetimes. I think it's important to understand the urgency of now and the harm of now in terms of what pollution has done within this generation, from environmental justice, is where this started. We didn't know about the climate crisis. Now we know about the climate crisis. We understand climate justice is important in this country and outside of this country. We've just seen reporting that we know that the catastrophic drought that's happening in the Horn of Africa is caused because of the climate crisis. And we know that the United States is the largest historical emitter, right? And currently the largest oil producer. So that was a true crash course in climate injustice, with a focus on the harms and the suffering that is happening now and is only worsening because of those vulnerabilities that is first happening to Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Absolutely. So appreciate that, Ryan. And you and I have had dialogues, and it stands out to me that these disparate harms are in many ways intersectional when they manifest in communities. I think about the report by the University of California, Berkeley, and San Francisco that looked at the connection between neighborhoods that were historically redlined and the prevalence of 200% times more climate changing fossil fuel infrastructure, oil and natural gas wells. And, for me, that seems like just a very a physical representation that these harms, have historic intersections and relationship. And if the harm is intersectional, then our solution must be as well. Brian, Jesse, want to get you in on this as well. Brian, I think I saw a hand there. chime in, man.
Yeah, no, I'd love to follow Raya there. Just to give an example of a community we have here in Connecticut, it's the south end of Bridgeport here in the state of Connecticut. This is a community that historically was very prosperous. Mary and Eliza Freeman were two African-American women who were very entrepreneurial, very successful. In the south end of Bridgeport, they built this little area that was known as Little Liberia. The Paugussett Indians used to visit this area and intermingle with families there. It was a part of the Underground Railroad. But today, if you look at the historic landmark that is the Mary and Eliza Freeman homes, right behind their homes is an old coal-fired power plant. So at some point, someone made a decision to site a power plant in what was a prosperous community happening here in Bridgeport. Fortunately, this coal-fired power plant is now retired and is making Bridgeport an energy community as a result. Unfortunately, there's now a natural gas peaker in the community. There is other efforts wanting to bring other energy technologies into the community. But what's good to see is that now members within the neighborhoods of the South End are having a conversation facilitated. Thank you, Communities Leap, the local energy action plan program of the Department of Energy, where the National Renewable Energy Lab is coming in, helping the community understand its resources, its energy consumption, its clean energy production potential, and having a conversation with its citizens about how to realize the value of this economy. So getting to your point, William, on equity, how can people in this community benefit from this investment that is there, but is going to grow and accelerate so that they can realize the full potential of this economy across the board, not just families and businesses reducing energy burden, but also realizing the entrepreneurial and economic development benefits as well. So I hear you, Raya, like, and this is everywhere, all over this country, and we need to do what we can to lift up, enable more investment in these communities.
Absolutely, Brian. And, I appreciate that comment, because that reality that you laid out is indicative, as you alluded to, of so many stories, of so many communities nationwide. These are the places we are trying to reach. And I want to give you a 30-second pitch to follow up on that and tell us from your perspective how the Connecticut Green Bank is working to support that community, and why is it important as we wrestle with the role of finance in this transition. We recognize that this moment of sustainability and reclamation is not just about reclaiming our environment, but it's reclaiming these communities, their stories, their cultures, cultural bastions that have been threatened and undercut by historic disparities. I don't know if you can do it in 30 seconds, but we're going to try. So.
We learned along the way, and our vision statement is motivated by a lot of things, but Maya Angelou's On the Pulse of Morning is seminal in that vision statement. But we realize that a planet protected by the love of humanity means that we can't have environmentalism.
The revolution just snatched away.
The mic got hot, and so we'll come back to Brian. I'm sure he's going to hop back on and give us that 30-second blurb. But Jesse, I know we wanted to pull you into this portion of the conversation. You are very aware of these realities. How does that inform the work and the visioning and the strategy that you're leading at dream.org?
Yeah, we're at dream.org. As mentioned before, we work at the intersection of climate justice, racial justice, and economic justice, and had been a part of the many groups who've been advocating for Build Back Better and what turned into the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we set out a 10-year plan with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest U.S. climate investment in the history in the world, and making sure that we are, through the next 10 years, going to double the amount of climate investments going to minority-owned businesses, ensure that 40% Justice 40 goal is a floor, not a ceiling, and then really try to get to 2050 carbon neutrality, but being able to do it while creating work and wealth opportunities for people of color. What is reality, which I think my colleagues on the panel would recognize, is that the advocacy world, the energy that exists in the advocacy world is really focused on passing legislation. And then people tend to be like, all right, our job is done. And I think when you move into implementation, you realize you have 99 other steps to get from the letter of the law to actually making an impact in people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And all climate policy is local policy, you know, it's all land use policy, it's all economics, local economics. And so for us, really building the tiers both of federal advocacy, creating enabling conditions at the state level, especially in purple and red states. So that funding is going to priority communities, and then getting the local players to be collaborating, get together around a climate agenda, a workforce development agenda, and also a community development agenda. And then I'll just add, I know my answer is a little bit long, but we do have an entrepreneurship pathway to speak to what we've been talking about with creating economic empowerment through this. And it has been really critical for us to be thinking about what is our role in helping develop, you know, a readiness curriculum for people who are on the pathway to trying to grow their businesses in the sector. What does creating access to social networks and capitals? I mean, most people are not aware, you know, of the kind of conversations that are happening in the GGRF space. How do we raise the visibility of businesses like BOSS, you know, or the Green for All Business Council as being investment worthy, you know, and like the greatest bet that you could make for VCs in today's world. And so it's complicated and it's interconnected, but it's really important that we really think audaciously about the large scale goals that we're trying to accomplish as a society at this moment in time.
Absolutely, Jesse, absolutely. And, you know, I hope that we will get to explore that a bit further, especially as we talk about the need for that parallel secondary infrastructure to make sure that these projects or these one-time cash and project infusions that we see are not just one-time infusions, but actually create recycled opportunities. So I hope we get a chance to touch base on that. Brian, I see we have you back with us. We had a chance to let the mic cool off a little bit. You were about to go into some top level knowledge there. Back to you. So
there we go. Yeah, I was right in it before my system like crashed. But now I'm on my trusted iPhone and it works. But no, what I wanted to say was that, you know, our vision statement, inspired by a lot of things, including Maya Angelou's On the Pulse of Morning, is a planet protected by the love of humanity. We can't have environmentalism without humanitarianism. And it's only when we connect with each other and people in our communities and enable them that access to capital where they get to realize the benefits of the green economy that we're going to be able to connect and see the future that we want to be as a country. So this moment is really a big one for all of us. And, you know, green banks, green lenders, community lenders, we are all here to play our part in this ecosystem that we have ahead of us.
absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. Want to look and see that there is, we're getting quite a bit of traction in the chat. Thank you all attendees for dropping questions. We're going to make sure to get to those in due time. I do want to elevate a recurring question that we all have wrestled with. Awareness, the awareness of communities at the local level of these opportunities, of these projects, of these conversations has been such a critical point to engagement, to creating those secondary and parallel infrastructures, and to having truly transformational relationships and trust with community players. Can you all talk a little bit about the best practices or the strategies you all are utilizing day to day to ensure that communities are aware of opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act, in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and how they can begin to do the work to position themselves to benefit from these resources? And I'll start with you, Jesse.
Great. Yes, we ran into a statistic that like 2% of Americans know that the Inflation Reduction Act actually ever happened. And so if you can imagine getting to the communities who need it the most, the communities most impacted by poverty and pollution, where you're getting so many kinds of messages every single day and you're living with so many different kinds of stressors, I'm sure the number is much lower. We are embarking in like a national education campaign about the Inflation Reduction Act. We are eager for people to understand how what's in this legislation is actually can become a reality within your own communities, talking about what are the kinds of investments you might be able to see. We've gone through in a listening tour and technical assistance tour in 10 different communities, rural, urban and suburban, because we know each of those kinds of communities have different factors that they're dealing with. Just to lift up the rural communities and the suburban communities, I'm originally from Iowa. Most folks don't have a sustainability director. They don't have a planning director. Maybe they have a general manager. Maybe they're unincorporated. And so being able to figure out who are the players that need to actually be assembled to both lift up community vision, develop community vision, but then also like the bureaucratic pieces of like, who's going to press the button? Who's going to request the funds? How are the funds going to get to you? How is it going to be distributed? People are not aware that the Inflation Reduction Act dollars have different kinds of beneficiaries. You have community organizations that could be receiving federal funding. You have state governments that could be receiving federal funding. You have local governments who can be receiving federal funding. The actual like network of recipients within a geography is pretty diverse, and how are they going to be connected together so we are all like marching towards the same goals? Anyways, that's the kind of questions that we're trying to solve at my organization, but you can't solve it alone. You have to solve it in deep partnership with other networks, and that's why we're really proud to be a part of the Coalition for Green Capital and the activities that they've been able to do to try to reach out both to CDFIs, community developers, workforce development, economic development agencies, and obviously frontline communities.
Absolutely. Raya and then Brian, come over to you all for some best practices in creating this awareness at the ground level.
My brother's name is Brian, and so hearing Ryan Brian is something Ryan Brian. But this is an incredibly important question. Look, we have a major gap in cultural awareness about all climate, environmental, sustainability, and justice issues, period. And I do want to go ahead and say that part of the reason that we have that gap is misinformation and true, billions of dollars that goes into lobbying from the fossil fuel industry. I mean, that's a big part of that. We've got, public dollars going into mass education campaign one, private dollars and efforts trying, there, maybe two, and, fossil fuel industry on way on fleek on 10. So, I want to, we really need to move forward on those cultures, and that is reflected in, how we understand things like recycling. We know that, a lot of, plastic can't be recycled, yet, that is, a narrative that's, really pushed by the fossil and plastics industry. We know that yes, individual actions matter, but our individual carbon footprint is another shift, to take the eye off the fossil fuel industry. And there's been a lot of funds and efforts to go into that. That said, I can't agree more. I'm so excited to hear about what Jesse is talking about in terms of, public awareness in the first instance about this, pop ed, culture education. That is why I am Climate Auntie. Everybody can follow their Climate Auntie on Instagram. You have a Climate Auntie. And cultural awareness and pop ed is something that I work on all the time and is super important. I also, though, the real work is, and that's something I'm engaged in, and we need help and connection so badly, is literally on the phone with our, local leaders, the woman who runs our African American Business Council, some of the folks on this call right now, Soulful Synergy, big ups, incredible BIPOC-led workforce development and training and implementation, folks, everybody working together to understand the structure of this funding, to understand, who, to Jesse's point, like who can apply and how we can, because you can't just, we've got folks who have folks who have been in the space and really deserve a shake at being big players. And that's what we need to make sure we empower. But all sorts of folks who have not been in this space, who are our Black and, people of color business folks. But you can't just call up a business person and say, hey, come get down with the IRA. There's money in it. There's money in it. Like, yes. And, any business person is going to be like, wait a minute. The federal money game is not a quick money game if you are outside of it, right? What does it mean for myself, for my business? What does it mean to think about, setting up a manufacturing plant, that could qualify? What does that mean for my business, my expertise, the partnerships I need? It's incredibly complicated. And I think that folks underestimate the literal organizing and wraparound work that it takes to do that, and you could one misfire, maybe somebody else is going to, someone else is in line for that grant. You don't know what you should be applying for. You could spend months doing all of that organizing, creating all that partnership to not get a grant that somebody else was kind of first in line for, and your entire financial funding season is blown in terms of the resources that you put in to do that grant making. And I see that Jesse's nodding because this is somebody who understands, what it means to be someone on the ground who's trying to get in the game. So I'll stop. But there needs to be an emphasis on this infrastructure that can help make this happen.
Excellent. Brian, over to you.
Yeah, I guess I would add the first word in IRA is inflation. And what happened in Connecticut, which in and of itself was education for all families, was as a result of the war in the Ukraine and Connecticut's over-reliance on natural gas. Electric rates went from 25 cents per kilowatt hour to 37 cents per kilowatt hour. So let's talk inflation, right? Now let's talk about a solution to inflation, which are all those families we helped through Solar for All, working with Posigen to put solar on their rooftops. We literally now have thousands of installations across the state, including that great city of Bridgeport that I was talking about earlier. We've got meters on those devices so we could see how solar's doing. We've got the contracts. We know how much they're paying every month. So between the electric rates, the production, and the contracts, we actually know how much they're saving as a result of, 12-cent increase in electric prices as a result of something that they had nothing to do with, but now are having to bear the burden of rising electric costs. They're now smiling because solar is helping them navigate through this challenge that we're facing in terms of the war of the Ukraine and its macroeconomic impacts across the economy. So electric rates, Solar for All. We know Solarize campaigns work. Get your community groups, your local ambassadors who've done it, get them energized, get them out and about. You'll literally see logarithmic growth from people in the community that will want to install heat pumps, solar, batteries, community engagement. People trust their neighbors. So engage your neighbors in the community and support those campaigns. And then lastly, in Connecticut, we have a nonprofit organization called Sustainable Connecticut. We have 169 cities and towns in our state. About 130 of them have committed to supporting a certification program. They run a number of different things. It's kind of like what LEED is for green buildings. This is for sustainability in communities, and equity is front and center in it. But they are now making all towns aware about not only what's in the IRA, but also the IIJA, and providing support to them in terms of grant assistance and other technical assistance provisions. So engaging our community-based organizations, fundamental. They're the fabric of our democracy, our system of capitalism. We need to support it.
Absolutely. And I think, that where you ended, Brian, is such an important reminder that even in communities that seem to have a lacking of infrastructure, there has always been a skeletal infrastructure of community-based organizations, houses of worship, individuals, pillars in the communities that we can tap into as we are trying to create that relationship, build that trust, and get people on board. Jesse, I saw a hand. I think you had a burning comment, so over to you. Yeah.
I'll make this short. It's mostly just summary of literally a meeting that happened a few weeks ago. And I just wanted to explain it to you because this is the state of the infrastructure that we're currently in right now. We have a network of a few different organizations, national level organizations, but who have strengths in different geographies. And it's been nice because it's a very informal network. We talk to each other via text, when opportunities come up, we're like, how do we help each other achieve our goals? And I just want to give you this as an example. Block Power, who has been on this call moderating, they needed to make an investment in Oakland around affordable housing sites, and they specifically, they didn't have the context of the affordable housing sites in Oakland. They didn't have the context of the contractors that they'd be able to hire. So they enlisted an organization called the Green Lining Institute, who's housed in Oakland, and they brought in Green for All. We were able to bring in affordable housing developers from that area who know the community really well, could tell you, answer the question, like what houses could actually benefit from this technology, and put forward a set of 100 houses. The other piece that was really important is the procurement piece. We ended up seeing that there was a number of different actors, especially from minority chambers of commerce, or networks that they're like, I know a guy and I know this person, and this person's starting their business. And we realized that information is not captured in a formalized way anywhere. There are lists, right, of people that who can do different things, who might be ready to stretch. And one of the things that really came out, one was just the massive need for coordination, because different people have different parts of the puzzle to come together to make a reality like this of transferring a new technology into a community. But the other piece is that there's actually the guarantee that there's more funding to come is so important. And I just want to reiterate that because people are making real life decisions today. People who live at the margins, just like you said, their businesses are at the margin, their communities are at the margin, the affordable housing development that's so difficult to build is at the margin. And they're making a decision right now whether or not they're going to really take advantage of these green investments to help realize their community and business goals or not. And the only way that they're going to be able to understand it is if they see this within a suite of investments that are coming, and they don't just end at $369 billion. It seems like a lot, but it's actually just a down payment. What we actually need to be focusing on is leveraging the private sector market so that the funding sources exist beyond the grant dollars that are coming, which do have an expiration date. And so as we actually end up communicating and talking to communities on the ground, communities of color, BIPOC-led businesses, community developers, it's so important for us to be able to give them some confidence about how the funding is going to exist over time and why they need to pivot and make this investment into the green economy. So that was all. Just wanted to give a shout out to fellow folks who are trying to solve problems in real time and appreciating everybody.
That's such a powerful and critical piece. And it is also a perfect segue to the next place I want to steer the conversation around when we talk about benefiting low-income disadvantaged communities. What does that mean, specifically? And I want to talk about it through the lens of metrics of success. What metrics are we using or that you all have seen in your work to actually analyze and assess? Are we meeting important benchmarks of benefiting communities from their perspective, not based on our assumptions, but based on community need? In the work that we do with rural communities with Rural Beacon Initiative, we throw out that commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in this moment are great. Absolutely, full stop. But there is a different DEIJ, dollars, emissions, individuals, and jobs, that we have to talk about when we're saying, how do we operationalize those commitments? What does equity and justice actually accomplish in the day-to-day realities of people on the ground? I know there are frameworks. All three of you have helped us, and we've navigated conversations on identifying which metrics should we use to think about our strategic deployment. I know there are frameworks like, shout out to the University of Michigan and the School for Environment and Sustainability, the Energy Equity Project report that came out last year that has over 148 metrics to look at achieving energy equity. I'm curious as to you all's take on what metrics are there in the work that we can measure our success and the accomplishment of benefiting low-income and disadvantaged communities. Raya, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought this question up, this idea of what does benefit mean, because it really is the crucial question that we're looking at now. So yes, as you know, in New York State, advocates put forward the idea of the Justice 40, the 40% mandate that ultimately became the federal Justice 40. And there are things, though, that the advocates in New York did that are missing in that program. Okay, one of them is that we wanted all along for initial 40% of the benefits must go to disadvantaged communities. First, it's a floor, not a ceiling. And B, the initial ask was that it be dollars spent. And that's not everything, but it's a start, that it be dollars spent. We lost that battle when we got the law passed, but the state policy has shifted towards that idea that we should look at. One metric really is for that 40% is dollars spent. And so we've seen it's also it's a helpful context for a lot of the programs as we sort of start to identify where are the dollars coming from and how do we start reapportioning. So we saw in New York that our regional greenhouse gas initiative has applied this mandate for our it's 40% of a goal and a 35% must. 35% must go to frontline communities. We've seen our clean energy fund that funds our New York Green Bank go to that same metric in terms of how much must benefit disadvantaged communities. And so we really need to dig into what benefit means and how that it can be true and substantial. And something that I think is really important that we have to bring into this conversation is that we cannot presume that the green economy, the jobs that happen in the green workforce are going to be good jobs, are going to be good union jobs. There are, and so our New York State Climate Plan put a focus on creating good union jobs, family sustaining jobs, family sustaining wages. New York State just passed some new protections requiring that certain projects have, and they aren't all that advocates asked for. This literally just came, through last night. It was approved. But they are attaching requirements for labor peace, prevailing wage to certain projects. And so state action and requiring and enforcing good jobs that will promote union jobs is so important. We cannot assume that these green jobs will be good jobs because we are seeing in many cases that they are not. We are seeing abuse of workers. We are seeing dangerous working conditions. We are seeing all kinds of practices that, I heard some stories from some workers in Ohio working in the green industry just last week. And they talked about how, yes, they are checked as a box, bringing in folks who don't have skills to check a box for local hiring requirements, not being developed, not getting training, being required to pay for training, certifications that then don't qualify when you go to a different company or work site, having to travel 3, 4, or 5 hours each way and not getting adequate per diems, getting injured and not getting protections. Workers of color not getting promoted, women not getting promoted. So we need to make sure that we have these labor standards and that they are enforced, or we're going to be talking about a fairy tale green workforce, that even as it comes down for being abstract, does not provide quality jobs. Just bringing forward the earlier conversation, we have to focus on quality in these jobs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Raya, I think you bring up, such an important point that these hard conversations and hard realities do not dampen the possibility and the opportunity in front of us. It actually, as we force these conversations, eyes wide open, it makes sure that we maintain momentum and maintain that opportunity or that possibility of opportunity for all at the worker level, the owner level, the developer level, the intermediaries, that we have to have these hard conversations if this moment of a green transition is a truly just and equitable one. So absolutely appreciate you raising that. Brian, and then Jesse. Brian, I know you've had some success in this work with the Connecticut Green Bank as well. So
yeah, no, I think I would go back to some of the comments I said earlier. I feel like the key input, as Raya was alluding to there, is investment, right? So the more public and private investment that we can enable in vulnerable communities, great. one of the fundamental principles of green banks is that we use a limited amount of public to mobilize a lot of private. So one of the metrics we track is Community Reinvestment Act eligible communities. So what we're trying to target is how much investment is flowing to less than 80% area median income census tracts in our state. So we track that. We tie that to our goal of no less than 40% of investment and benefits inure to those vulnerable communities with a focus on CRA eligible communities. So that's a really, really important one. But I'm a big fan of the DOE Justice 40 initiative. I think that, you know, the 8 burdens and things that they've laid out there, benefits that they've laid out there are really clean. You know, reducing energy burden, environmental exposure to burden, really, really key. Increasing parity in clean energy technology diffusion, right? This is one of the things that we can all get our arms around and measure, as well as increasing energy security. So no longer should we just be thinking about reducing energy burden, but we should be thinking about energy security too, as the impacts of climate are right here. One of our favorites, increasing access to low-cost capital in disadvantaged communities. That's a front and center for all of us community lenders across the country. I'm happy to say that we are a part of the Coalition for Green Capital, working to build a big green tent to bring more of these resources to communities across the country. And then, of course, you know, what we've been talking about, which I think is the hardest challenge that we're trying to get to, is, you know, increasing enterprise creation, contracting for underserved populations so that we can help them realize the benefits of the economy that we're creating. So DOE Justice 40 initiative, really good stuff, all measurable things.
Great. Jesse.
Yeah, I love what Ryan was saying about the investment piece, and I heard it echoed also from what Brian was saying. Brian and Raya. But I will say, you know, one of the things, having actually implemented climate equity programs as a state and local government executive, is we do have to explain to people about the return on investment when you're talking about low-income communities and communities of color. There's a tendency for federal government to just want to invest, or all layers of government to just want to invest in project funding, meaning like the hard dollars going to like build the actual infrastructure. And actually, for this work to be successful, you need to have enough programming dollars. That means dollars that could go to what we're talking about: workforce training, education, actually like things like being able to pay for passes for infrastructure, like public infrastructure, zero emission buses, being able to make it accessible. So you're building either ridership or ownership, or all of these things require programming dollars. And beyond programming dollars, there's a subset of that called capacity building dollars. And capacity building dollars are really critical because, and I'll say this, to not state the obvious, but after years of federal investments building highways through Black and Brown communities, dividing them from key job sources, being able to isolate them from funding opportunities. The reason that CRA exists today is because there was redlining occurring in these communities for years that set Black and Brown communities back and didn't give them the level playing field that they're currently in. And so it's really important to recognize that history, and that there's deep distrust within these communities of federal and other government actors. And so what capacity building dollars do is be able to rebuild some trust early before you enter into a community and you're like, I'm about to build an EV charging station, but I've talked to nobody here. Like, you actually need to build trust, build up capacity within messengers who are trusted messengers, bring these multi-sectoral conversations together, and just recognize that we're starting at a different place, than other folks maybe who have experience being able to receive the benefits of federal investment for a long time. And so I just want to pull that out, that it's the type of dollar. It's not even just the actual dollar, it's the type of dollar that we have the capability to be able to use for different purposes, that we need to really be pushing government to give us that kind of flexibility, and also be able to educate private sector funds who are driven by other kinds of metrics about how this is actually, you need that comprehensive approach, because if you do that early, if you invest early, you can have long-term benefits beyond the initial investment or funding dollars, to actually make climate resiliency and GHG reductions like an actual part of a community's practices.
Can I just come in and snap on everything that she just said? What I think what we really and just, it's also like California, Connecticut, New York, like we need to have these dialogues because we're so busy here and y'all have been like, wow, these things, and like, whoa, these things.
Absolutely.
That's not really a scientific way to say anything, but
I feel it.
Snapping and woeing.
Snapping and woeing, snapping and woeing. Such powerful insights. Definitely, you all are dropping knowledge left and right. I know we have about 2 minutes here, and I want to give you all a chance to close out with your best elevator pitch. Prompt is thus: we know that this moment and the crisis that we face is of such an unprecedented scale that no one societal sector individually can accomplish it on its own. Government can accomplish it on its own. Private finance cannot. Technological innovation, community advocacy, nor academia. We really need a whole of societal approach to implement this vision of a nationwide and global retrofit that is truly just and sustainable. With that in mind, can each of you share your quickest, most powerful, what is your personal vision? What next steps do we need to implement to make that a reality? And we'll popcorn it. So
I'll jump in. Remind me to take note to self. Will is going to ask you some really big, tough questions, but this one is one of my favorites, and it's all good. Let's work together, y'all. Let's work together. Let's work together in. We have to do it in a way that's brave. We have to do it with love. We have to empower each other. We have to embrace this vision. We can do this. It's not easy. We're doing things that haven't been done before. We're facing opposition from an industry that has no desire to give up its market share. So we need to work together. We need to listen to the folks who are most impacted. We need to really and truly share resources and just be brave and have hope. And that's what's up. Oh, and follow your climate auntie on Instagram.
Love it, love it, love it. So last week, Secretary Granholm said something that was really, really moving to a lot of us. She said, we are an irresistible nation. And we are in that moment right now where we can become a phenomenal nation if we realize that the DNA, the helix of equity in the environment are intertwined. Like this isn't about environmentalism. This is about environmentalism and humanitarianism. We have a saying, we issue green bonds. We have a tagline, Green Bonds US, because we sell our green bonds to citizens across this country. But green bonds, an environmental instrument at retail across the country, green, the environment bonds us, the environment unites us. So it is actually fundamentally something that all of us can wrap our arms around and lift this country up. So right now is our moment. We've got the next 5 years to figure it out.
Yep, I will end. I will try to end positively, but this is what I'm going to say. The $369 billion is a huge opportunity. And at Dream, we are in the business of creating opportunities for BIPOC communities across the country. I will tell you, though, if the status quo moves the way it does, we will be facing the biggest increase in inequality that we have ever seen in our country. And so the actual unintended impacts of not having an equity first strategy in everything that we do with these climate investments are so huge, it will take years to repair. And so I say this to pull up your sleeves, everyone get to work. The moment is now. We have about 2 years where we are creating the guidelines for how we're going to end up working together. We're going to have to create the market indicators of what new businesses need to be coming in, what new businesses need to be leaving. We are going to be deciding on the communities where the deep investments need to happen. All of that is happening today. And I will encourage everyone to say, like, we need to be able to work together. Some of the pieces, not everyone is ready to be having multi-sectoral conversations with each other. But if you're ready for this, within your career, then we need you. We need you to be leaning into talking to people that you don't normally talk to, the unlikely allies, the people that are out of your comfort zone. Honestly, the people who you go to meetings and you're like, I never want to see that pool ever again. Go back because, we actually need all these people to talk to each other in this moment in time, because if we don't, we're going to miss it. And there's going to be really, really, really negative consequences associated with that. And then I will say to the bottom up and top down, both are important. You need top-down infrastructure, you need bottom-up infrastructure. And I would just say what actually needs to be created is the meet in the middle team. Who is the meet in the middle team? The people who are actually going to bridge these two strategies, because both are existing at the same time and they need to be. There's not one that's better than the other, but what is the meet in the middle strategy, and who are those people that are going to be creating those spaces? Because again, like I said, this is a huge opportunity to right wrongs from the past, but it's also a huge opportunity that if we don't do it right, we'll actually be perpetuating them. So a positive and negative. Maybe William, can you just close us out with something really, really uplifting?
Some realism, which is always what we really need, to make sure that we do this work. So Raya, Jesse, Brian, thank you all so much for this inspiring and insightful panel discussion. And thank you for the work that each of you do each and every day to make this transition a truly just, equitable, and sustainable one. We're really looking forward to leaning in and doing this work with you. And with that, I'm going to say thank you all and pass it over to CGC's Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer, Eli Hobson.
Thank you, Will. And I just first want to give a big thank you to all of our speakers and panelists today. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Incredibly thoughtful, really great ideas across the spectrum. And so, from starting with Ken and Senator Markey and our first panelists, and then as always, Will, you're a hard act to follow, and Raya and Jesse and Brian. So I don't envy anybody else being in this position. I wanted to give you just a few thoughts as we're wrapping up today. I also wanted to thank our attendees for coming to join and hearing about how we see the path forward and our panelists see the potential path forward to really make a difference in workforce development and diversity across all levels of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the related climate transition possibilities here. So a few thoughts from me, and then one last thank you also to our co-hosts at the Atlantic Council. I want to thank Frank, Greg, Ken, and the full team at Atlantic Council for doing a great job keeping this all well lit and appropriately level adjusted. Appreciate your all's help in getting this webinar off and running very smoothly. So a few thoughts, one that I want to just echo actually what Raya just said is we have to work together for this transition to be successful. We are supporting, a large green tent, as Brian said. We want to be working with all of you who would be interested in participating in the clean transition. And we want to be, Jesse, I was laughing at your meet in the middle, we want to be that mid-level organization that is helping to connect capital sources from the public sector, from the private sector, with a wide variety of lending institutions, of businesses and nonprofits who are looking to make investments in this space. But being open, working together as a team, supporting each other, even if we're not in direct business with each other, we want to be supporting other efforts from other entities. So working together is a critical component to making this transition successful. Community-focused projects was a theme that we heard quite a bit. Community-focused workforce, both from training perspective, but also from a ownership and from a long-term quality job creation perspective. Community buy-in and support is critical, and that requires several components, including education. So appreciated the question from the audience. highlighting the need for education about greenhouse gas reduction fund and other opportunities for disenfranchised communities. And I think that's something that Jesse and others spoke eloquently about our ongoing efforts to work with organizations and individuals who have experience going out into communities that may not be hearing from a wide variety of potential lenders. They may not have a sustainability officer. They may not have the time or the attention or the budget to be focused on the wide array of these federal opportunities that are coming down the pike. And it's important for organizations like dream.org and like our community lenders at Connecticut and others to be putting in the time to do the outreach to those communities who don't have the capacity to send folks to webinars like this one and to track all of the various funding announcements that are coming out of EPA and other federal agencies. Another key theme, the incorporation of diversity and environmental justice at every level. We think it's critical that, as Michael Dorsey said on the first panel, that diversity be incorporated not just in the workforce that we see implementing these clean energy projects on the ground, but at the ownership level and at every step of the capital stack. So that means for all of the community lenders who are going to be participating in the climate transition, but also for the national financing entities that we are intending to set up and that others are intending to set up. Diversity in that workforce is a critical component to making these programs successful and making sure that when we're communicating with disenfranchised communities, we have the representation on our side to understand the challenges and the backgrounds and the diverse array of opportunities that those communities can represent. Then the last piece that I thought was helpful and I wanted to raise up and remind folks about is the need for flexibility. Because here we see a wide variety of federal dollars potentially coming down the pike to a wide variety of institutions. In order for this program to be successful, we have to establish long-term sustaining institutions that can be flexible as they deploy. Because while I wholeheartedly agree with Jesse that the next 2 years are critical to how we set up the plan, the reality is we can't solve all of these problems in 2 years. And we need institutions that are working with communities who may not have a community lender established, and they're going to need to be brought along with education, with capital support, and with new technologies that are under development today. So it's critical that as we look forward to how the climate transition can be supported, how we can be growing our workforce, we need institutions that are capable of supporting over the long term and have the flexibility to be able to make adjustments, as the climate unfortunately is going to force changes in our best laid plans, and as technology advancements move forward and as communities become more engaged. And so creating that kind of sustaining institution that's self-supported and truly independent is a critical piece that I'm excited to work with you all on. So for closing remarks, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Berlin. And thank you all for participating today. I'm looking forward to working with all of you on this really critical area. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. That was a great summary. I just want to say I also thought this was a terrific session. It shows the great opportunities we have going forward, but also the great challenges we face in making sure this is implemented and in an effective, generally an effective way, and doesn't get bogged down. Putting on an event like this requires a lot of people. I'd of course like to thank Senator Markey, Eli, our moderators, Libby and Will, and all of our panelists. It also takes an internal team. I'd like to thank at the Atlantic Council, Meyer Edwards, Greg Luzak, Graham McGillivray, Jackson Styron, Jasper Gelati, Salandra Thompson, Laura Macedo, Katie Kenny, Maya Sparkman, Liz Bowen, and above all, Frank Willie, who spent a tremendous amount of time on this. At the Coalition for Green Capital, I'd like to thank Eli, Reed Hunt, and Nina Young for partnering with us on this event. This is the first of a series of many events that we're going to hold at the Atlantic Council as part of our new program, Financing and Achieving Cost-Competitive Climate Solutions. Included in these events is going to be, later this month, another solution summit into the coordination of the vast network of awardees and sub-awardees of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and looking at financial, administrative, and other questions in addition to the labor question that arise in implementing the fund and implementing it effectively. So please stay connected with us. Keep an eye out for this event. Keep an eye out for other events by the Atlantic Council. I'm sure Coalition for Green Capital could say the same thing. But again, I want to thank everybody for attending this and everybody who participated in it, and hope everyone got as much out of this as I did. So with that, I'll conclude and say thank you.
Thank you, everyone.